Gasping for air, the soul of King Baron fractured and settled into a freezing, unfamiliar bed. He stared down at his hands, finding small, uncalloused fingers completely unsuited for holding a heavy sword. A rushed memory transfer revealed he was now Callian Lane Caris, the despised third prince of his sworn enemy nation. This fragile 14-year-old body was slowly being consumed by a covert, slow-acting poison fed to him daily. Baron smirked with cold amusement, realizing that 10 years in the past meant all his future strategic knowledge was perfectly intact. He smoothly stood up, ignoring the agonizing ache in his lungs as he dressed in a simple royal tunic. The mirror reflected a fragile boy, but the gaze within was that of an absolute conqueror. Leaving his chambers, he walked directly toward the royal training grounds where the knights gathered. Knight Commander Franz stood in the center of the courtyard, laughing loudly with his subordinates while mocking the third prince. When Callian entered the arena, the knights didn't even bother to salute their superior. Franz stepped forward insolently, tossing a heavy steel training sword into the dirt at Callian's feet. Callian looked down at the weapon, knowing this current frail body lacked the strength to lift it properly. Instead of reaching for the sword, he calmly walked over to a nearby decorative tree and snapped off a slender branch. The knights erupted into loud laughter, utterly convinced the weak prince had finally lost his mind. Callian stripped away the excess leaves with a swift, fluid motion that instantly silenced the mockery. Deep within his soul, Baron activated a secret, dormant circle of mana to artificially reinforce his weak muscles. Insulted by the gesture, Franz bared his teeth and lunged forward with a reckless, heavy downward strike. Callian did not step back, merely shifting his weight by an inch to let the heavy blade graze his sleeve. With lightning speed, the wooden twig whipped through the air, carrying the concentrated force of compressed mana. The flexible branch struck the weak joint of Franz's wrist armor, shattering the underlying bone instantly. The heavy broadsword clattered uselessly into the dirt as Franz staggered backward, clutching his broken wrist. Before the knight could cry out, Callian swept his foot forward, kicking the man's ankle to shatter his balance completely. Franz crashed heavily onto his back, the wind driven from his lungs in a painful gasp. Callian stood directly over him, pressing the sharp, splintered tip of the branch against the knight's exposed throat. The surrounding soldiers froze in absolute terror, unable to comprehend how a weakling had subdued their commander in 2 moves. Dropping the blood-stained twig onto Franz's face, Callian turned away without uttering a single word. He knew this display would quickly reach the ears of his primary antagonist, Queen Celiche. It was time to attend the mandatory royal family breakfast and face the nest of vipers head-on. The heavy doors swung open, revealing an opulent dining room filled with the suffocating scent of roasted meats and hidden tension. At the head of the table sat Queen Celiche, her golden hair perfectly braided and her icy eyes narrowing at his entrance. The other princes watched in silence, expecting the usual timid, trembling boy to bow down in fear. Callian walked forward with a slow, measured grace of an absolute sovereign, completely ignoring standard protocol. He pulled out a heavy velvet chair directly opposite the queen and seated himself without waiting for permission. The entire room grew deathly quiet as the servants lowered their heads in absolute panic. Queen Celiche slammed her silver chalice onto the table, the wine splashing across the white linen cloth like fresh blood. She demanded to know who gave a pathetic, broken child the right to sit at her table without bowing. Callian merely smiled, leaning back into his seat while his ruby eyes locked onto hers with predatory intensity. He calmly stated that a true prince of the realm requires no permission from someone who is merely a guest in his lineage. Celiche gasped, her face turning pale as she realized the weak boy she had been poisoning possessed a terrifyingly dominant aura. He picked up a silver knife, turning it slowly in the light while staring into her icy eyes with an unspoken threat. As the absolute silence threatened to break the room apart, a sudden heavy crash echoed from the palace courtyard outside. A frantic royal guard burst through the dining doors, his face completely pale as he gasped out a warning about an impending disaster. The guard collapsed to one knee as the dining hall erupted into murmurs. Queen Celiche gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning completely white. Callian remained perfectly still, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the sudden disruption. The messenger blurted out that a critical structural defect had been discovered near the Grand Festival Pavilion. Callian remembered this specific incident from his past life as King Baron. This was the exact day the second prince was meant to suffer a permanent, crippling injury. The fragile third prince slowly stood up from his seat, drawing every eye in the room toward him. He informed the court that the preparations must proceed exactly as scheduled without a single delay. Prince Randall sneered at his younger brother, completely dismissing the warning as mere cowardice. Hours later, the grand festival pavilion was filled to capacity with wealthy nobles from across the kingdom. Callian positioned himself near the main pillar, his gaze locked onto the high ceiling. The massive crystal chandelier above began to hum with a faint, unstable magical resonance. Standing across the room, Master Mage Manisil suddenly stopped his conversation. Prince Randall walked directly into the center area, completely unaware of the impending doom. With a deafening crack, the massive iron chains holding the chandelier snapped completely. The surrounding nobles screamed in terror as they scrambled away from the impact zone. Randall froze in absolute horror, his feet seemingly glued to the polished floor. Callian bolted forward with explosive speed that defied his fragile physical appearance. He secretly activated a hidden wind attribute magic circle beneath his leather boots. Callian slammed his shoulder into Randall, violently launching both of them across the floor. The colossal crystal chandelier impacted the marble floor with a thunderous, shattering crash. Randall rolled across the floor, groaning heavily but completely untouched by the lethal glass. Callian stood up effortlessly from the dust cloud, calmly brushing off his ruined royal garments. Master Mage Ellen watched Callian from the shadows, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. The ancient mage had clearly noticed the fleeting activation of high-level ancient magic. Callian intentionally locked eyes with the Master Mage, offering a subtle, knowing smirk. Later that evening, Ellen quietly entered the secluded library of the Third Prince's palace. Callian was already waiting for him, sitting behind a large desk with a cup of hot tea. Ellen demanded to know how a fragile, untalented prince could perform a perfect sixth circle wind spell. Callian took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea before setting the cup down without a sound. He looked directly into the mage's eyes and stated that the talent belonged to a dead king. Ellen scoffed loudly, raising his staff as a defensive blue mana barrier flared into existence around him. Callian didn't flinch, instead tracing a complex geometric pattern on the wooden desk with his finger. He whispered a secret, highly classified magical formula that only the former king of Secretia could possibly know. The Master Mage dropped his staff, the blue barrier shattering into countless harmless sparkles. Callian stood up, his small physical body suddenly radiating the immense suffocating pressure of a true ruler. He extended an ultimatum to the legendary mage, offering him a choice between blind loyalty or absolute ruin. Ellen fell to his knees, completely conquered by the undeniable presence of King Baron. Callian smiled coldly, knowing he had just secured the strongest chess piece in the entire kingdom. Suddenly, the magical communication crystal on the desk flared into a violent, blood-red alarm light. A distorted, frantic voice echoed from the crystal, screaming that the Secretian spy network had just been compromised. The frantic transmission from the communication crystal faded into an eerie, suffocating silence inside the secret chamber. Callian immediately tightened his grip on the glowing artifact, his mind racing to analyze the exact location of the breach. He wrapped a heavy obsidian black traveling cloak over his royal attire to completely conceal his royal identity. Slipping quietly past the slumbering palace guards, the young prince utilized a secret drainage pathway leading out toward the capital city. The dark alleys of the lower capital smelled heavily of damp earth and systemic rot, a perfect haven for outcasts. He soon reached a seemingly abandoned tavern, recognizing the hidden Secretian military mark carved discreetly into the wooden frame. Inside, 3 armed operatives immediately drew their short swords, their defensive stances radiating lethal intent. Callian calmly pulled back his hood, allowing his glowing ruby-red eyes to flare with the unmistakable mana signature of Secretia's old royalty. The spies gasped in unison and instantly dropped to their knees, recognizing the secret code phrase he uttered next. The network leader quickly explained that Queen Celiche's personal executioners had targeted their safe houses across the city. Callian promised them complete structural asylum within the outer palace borders, utilizing his newly acquired authority. Before finalizing their evacuation, the leader mentioned a dangerous underground arena where extraordinary slaves were being fought to the death. Callian immediately realized this was the precise location where Kyrie, his future unmatched Shadow Blade, was currently trapped. He left the safe house swiftly, navigating through a web of subterranean iron tunnels to reach the illegal fighting ring. The colossal underground coliseum vibrated violently with the wild, bloodthirsty cheers of corrupt noble spectators. Down in the central dirt arena, a silver-haired youth was brutally fighting against a massive, heavily armored iron golem. Kyrie moved with the raw, terrifying velocity of a starving beast, dodging lethal heavy iron strikes by mere inches. Suddenly, the silver-haired warrior's old weapon shattered entirely against the golem's impenetrable enchanted chestplate. The monstrous machine raised its gargantuan iron fist, prepared to crush the defenseless gladiator into the dust. From the shadows of the VIP balcony, Callian instantly channeled his inner mana into a sharp, piercing crimson beam. The concentrated magical energy violently pierced the core of the golem, causing the entire metal beast to explode into thousands of fragments. Kyrie stared upward into the smoky balcony, locking his fierce blue eyes onto his mysterious, youthful savior. Callian leaped down effortlessly onto the battlefield, tossing a massive bag of pure gold coins directly at the terrified arena master's feet. He stood directly before the silver-haired warrior, offering his hand alongside a vow of absolute power and ultimate freedom. Kyrie placed his forehead firmly against Callian's boots, sealing a lifelong pact of absolute and unyielding devotion. With his military force and personal guardian secured, Callian immediately initiated the final phase of his plan to neutralize the queen. He orchestrated a false intelligence leak that lured Queen Celiche's inner circle into a highly classified royal treasury chamber. The following morning, Queen Celiche herself entered the Grand Council chamber, completely unaware of the lethal political snare waiting for her. Callian sat quietly at the heavy mahogany table, flanked by Master Mage Ellen Manisil and several high-ranking neutral lords. Celiche smirked coldly, demanding that the fragile third prince be immediately executed for his unauthorized interactions with foreign elements. Callian merely chuckled, sliding a heavy stack of enchanted confession documents directly across the smooth wooden surface. The documents clearly detailed her secret financial funding of the underworld arena and her direct complicity in the historic poisoning of royal bloodlines. Master Ellen stepped forward, confirming that the magical signatures embedded on the documents were absolutely authentic and completely tamper-proof. Realizing her entire political alliance would crumble into dust if these treasonous files reached the king, Celiche trembled with profound rage. Callian smoothly produced a dark, shimmering parchment containing a forbidden, life-binding magical oath contract. This ancient contract required her to completely forfeit her political authority and permanently cease all hostile actions against his faction. Left with absolutely no strategic alternatives, the defeated queen bit her own index finger to draw the necessary blood for the signature. The moment her blood pressed against the surface, a blinding flash of golden chains erupted from the parchment and permanently dissolved into her chest. With the main antagonist utterly neutralized, Callian stood up from his seat, feeling the immense weight of the past timeline completely lift from his shoulders. Kyrie stood silently by his side as a permanent testament to his complete victory over fate. The fragile third prince had successfully rewritten history, securing his absolute ascension as the undisputed true ruler from the shadows.